After the break, half a century has passed, but the question still resonates. Where were you? We'll look back at the impact of the Kennedy assassination 50 years later when Tom Brokaw joins us next on Now. At approximately this time, 50 years ago, on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy boarded Air Force One en route to Dallas, Texas, where an hour later he would be assassinated in Dealey Plaza. America was locked in a bitter Cold War with the Soviet Union. 16,000 U.S. troops were stationed in Vietnam. 200,000 Americans had just marched on Washington. And then the death of the president. Earlier that day, President Kennedy delivered a final speech at the Texas Hotel in Fort Worth.
So this country, which desires only to be free, which desires to be secure, which desires to live at peace for 18 years under 3 different administrations, has borne more than its share of the burden, has stood watch for more than its number of years. I don't think that we are fatigued or tired. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. We are still the keystone in the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead. So I'm glad to come.
3.5 hours after giving that speech, President Kennedy was shot. Shortly after, he was declared dead. And even today, decades after it happened, Americans can still recall exactly what they were doing when they heard the terrible news. In a new NBC News documentary, Tom Brokaw asks the question, where were you?
I was in my calculus class, my 4th period advanced math class. I was a senior in high school. It was right after lunch that I heard my teacher, Doyle Coe, was the assistant principal, and he was called to the phone, and he came in totally ashen-faced and told us the president had been shot. I remember it as if it were yesterday.
What did you think?
I was heartbroken. I was hoping he would live.
On November 22nd, 1963, Steven Spielberg was a 16-year-old high school student and an aspiring filmmaker.
I was in school when the public address system came on in the classroom, and we listened to the principal saying that the president had been shot.
What did you think?
The first reaction I had was I wanted to go home. Was my first reaction. I wanted to go home and be with my mom and my dad and my sisters. And my mom was in the kitchen. She was sobbing at the kitchen table.
It just seemed so impossible that this great president that was so adored by the world was dead. And it's like everything became unsafe, and never has been ever since quite as sure about the world. It shook my worldview.
Joining us now is NBC News special correspondent Tom Brokaw, who has been reporting extensively on the 50th anniversary of JFK's death and wrote the foreword to the new book, Where Were You? America Remembers the JFK Assassination. And Hardball host Chris Matthews is still with us. He is, of course, author of Jack Kennedy, Elusive Hero. Tom, you've talked to the great American minds, some great American leaders about where they were the day that Kennedy was assassinated. Where were you?
I was in Omaha, Nebraska. In the first year of my job as the morning news editor at KMTV, the NBC affiliate. I had to do 3 Today Show cut-ins and write the noon news and do part of them. And it was a long day. And at about 12:30, I was kind of cleaning up, and all the bells on the teletype machine started to go crazy. And I wandered over there and then read that memorable Merriman Smith first bulletins dictated from the motorcade. Shots were fired at the presidential motorcade in Dallas today. The president perhaps fatally wounded. And I stood there staring at that, thinking this doesn't happen in America. And by the time we got on the air, we knew how gravely wounded he was, and then we knew that he was dead, because the network in those days would give back to the local stations an hour of local programming. So we had responsibility for Omaha, and then the network got up and got its act together, and they were able to tell people. I went to the Strategic Air Command headquarters to see what kind of an alert they were on. I couldn't get near the place, so I went downtown, and the Midwestern governors were meeting, and the de facto spokesman was Mitt Romney's father, George Romney.
Wow.
Came out. He was very appropriate, and it changed my life.
It changed, I mean, I think the course of history, Chris, and for those of us who weren't alive during the Kennedy administration, I think we don't have a sense of just how much energy was behind this first couple, what Kennedy represented to the nation. Robert Caro has a great sort of, in the book that Tom wrote the foreword to, he writes, 1 minute it was the Eisenhower era, where people were interested in materialism and making money. Then Jack Kennedy made these speeches, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted to go to Harvard Business School. The next minute, everyone wanted to enroll in the Peace Corps or work for Bobby Kennedy's Justice Department. He appealed to America's ideals, and he did so in words of genius. You signed up for the Peace Corps.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, first of all, the term 60s does not refer to the 10 years of the 61, 62, 69. No. I think, I mean, everybody has their own sense about this. The early 60s were Mad Men. So the guys with cigarettes and cocktails and girls and the office, the whole routine, old style, macho sort of culture, sexist, I guess you'd say. And then after Jack, there was this kind of pall over the country where we were kind of all in a bad mood, sad. And then the Beatles came along, kind of an elixir, but it didn't really change things. We tried to make ourselves happy after 63. Before 63, there was a natural joy in the country, a youth. Sure, we had to face the Soviet Union. Sure, they were getting stronger. It was a challenge. We hadn't beaten them, and they might have beaten us. But it was an early kind of thin ties, short hair, serious work habits. There was no screwing around. There's no flower children. There's no putting flowers in the guns. Kennedy was a hawk. That's my biggest problem with Oliver Stone. I mean, he has a good complaint about the fact that he didn't like the Vietnam War under Johnson, and he blames him for everything, including having a hand in Kennedy's death, which is an absurdity. But I think that we didn't have that anti-government attitude that grew in the 60s with not just with the war in Vietnam, but civil rights. We keep forgetting how many people were turned on by the civil rights. Peter, Paul, and Mary in a softer way, Bob Dylan in a harder way, but it was all folk music after that. But it was never as clearly joyous a country, I think, in the 60s as it was before he was killed.
But I think, you know, Tom, certainly these were halcyon days for America and American society in some ways, but the civil rights question was very much a real one, and there was a sense of, I mean, Sam Tannenhouse, writing today in the New York Times, talks about the sort of electric undercurrent of discontent that was palpable in and around the time that Kennedy was shot, and that Dallas was a very dangerous place to be at that moment. And
Dallas didn't have anything to do with the assassination, which is the interesting thing.
Right.
It was this lone misfit who'd gone to Russia. He was a far left guy, not a far right guy. So it's hard to untangle what was going on. Chris is quite right. The early part of the 60s had nothing to do with what we think of the 60s. The 60s. My own very strong impression is that, yes, the assassination did change us. There's no question about that. Did you have a mass of people saying, I've had it with institutions and with the government as it stands? I don't think that was the case. The boomers were still quite young when he was assassinated. I think they pushed back in part because their fathers had come home from the war with a regimented idea about how life should be lived. Mom should be at home. The dad should be out making a living. Drugs were very bad for you. Yeah. And then they had a lot of money to spend it on whatever they wanted to spend it on. And they pushed back and said, we're not going to stand in line the way earlier generations have. So it was a mix of all those things. The big, and I think Chris would agree with this, the big change with Kennedy was he was perfectly cast as a president in the television age. Television was suddenly in every living room. It was the primary instrument for which we got the news. People felt personally connected to him. And I thought, I was 20 at the time, that this would go on forever. But it ended with his assassination. We went back to Lyndon, and Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, and then we went to Nixon, and it was a complete reversal of what seemed to be a clear track to a different future.
Well, and keep in mind that Kennedy was not the only assassination in that era. Of course, you had Malcolm X, you had Bobby Kennedy, you had the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. I mean, it was a series, a cascade of events that, you know, we talk about the Kennedy assassination being sort of a 9/11 for a certain generation insofar as just the tide shifted. It is important, I think, to keep in context, this was a wave of events that took America's innocence in a lot of ways.
And there were lots of, you got to remember the Patty Hearst incident, you got to remember the Judge Jackson getting killed in California. You know, we had a form of anarchy going on in a lot of America, and the urban riots in the North that were all rooted in race and poverty. So this place was coming apart. But you couldn't say the root cause of that was when John Kennedy was assassinated. There were lots of elements that played into that.
The wonderful thing is, what I like about politics is its unpredictable nature and the phenomenal nature of politics. For the life of me, and I've been reading this, Tom has, of course, you have, for your generation, been trying to figure out how did Jack Kennedy get from being the rich kid, who could have had a pretty good life. He did have a good life, obviously. But where did the June civil rights speech come from? That magnificent going on the air in a matter of hours. Because I've watched the Crisis thing done on that. And we have a speech ready, Bobby. We have one. We don't have a speech ready. But he goes on and says that the civil rights is as old as the scriptures and as American as the Constitution. Every black family in America put his face up on the wall. I mean, all of a sudden you had a white guy, if you will, who was committed almost like from doctrine, from day one, I am a civil rights advocate. And then, even though he didn't get it through and he didn't have the public passion like Bobby did later on, but, you know, I love digging into the tapes and finding out how he's fighting with Dick Daley in Chicago to get Libanati in line, or going to Billy Green in Philly and trying to get Tall in line, and working the moderate Republicans in this great new book that's coming out from Todd Purdom. I've been reading it, and how he was a working pal for the good causes right to the end, to the point of being in the car that morning with Connolly and Jim Wright, trying to figure out how he's going to still carry Texas, being a civil rights guy. Yeah, where did that come from? Where did the Peace Corps come from? Was it Humphrey's idea? It was a bunch of other guys' idea, but he did it in a way nobody else would have done it. The moonshot, everybody had a lot to do with the moonshot, but, you know, he did it. He said, we're going to do it in 10 years.
And he had sent, Tom, rhetorically, such an incredibly huge sense of the presidency and what it meant. And in that speech that we played, the last speech that he gave, he says, we are still the keystone in the arch of freedom. I mean, these lines sort of are only Kennedy could give them, really. And they were.
And behind the scenes, however, he was saying to Bobby and to others, you can't believe how screwed up this place is.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they were very tough on the people around him. There are other things. We think of them as this well-oiled machine. He had never met Robert McNamara before he made him defense secretary. He offered him the job of Treasury Secretary and then got him to be the defense secretary. It was an all-white male Eastern establishment administration. Douglas Dillon was a Republican who was Secretary of the Treasury. Bobby was his closest confidant. As time went on, the circle got smaller and smaller. He was listening more and more to Bobby. The military chiefs coming out of World War II were ready to declare war on the world, and they would have bombed Castro in the first 15 seconds of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it was a lot more complicated than it looks from the outside, good and bad. And I conclude that the day that he was assassinated, his presidency was still a work in progress, and that he had really reached an apogee of sorts that he hoped would carry him through '64 against Barry Goldwater. My guess is it would have, but we'll never know.
Tom is so right. And by the way, just to project that down to the issue of Vietnam, nobody knows.
What he would have done.
Because up until the Fort Worth speech that morning, he was a hawk as hell. He said, if we leave that country, the government falls tomorrow. Right. He was still publicly a hawk. All the while, with Michael Forrestal and the others questioning the policy. But then you hear guys like Kenny O'Donnell saying, or Mansfield saying, well, he would have gotten us out of the war. Well, but they always caveat it by saying, after the '64 election. So clearly he was trying to figure it out. He really let it slide. He focused on other issues. He let Vietnam just drain away without any real focus on it. He didn't have a plan.
But the analysis of what could have been, what he would have done, I think does not end on this 50th anniversary or 50 years.
Well said.
NBC News special correspondent Tom Brokaw, an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for your time. The 2-hour special, Where Were You? The Day JFK Died, reported by Tom Brokaw, airs tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on NBC. And thank you, of course, to my friend and colleague, Chris Matthews.
I'll be watching it tonight at 9. I think it's going to be great.
I think we all should be.
I've just been trailing Chris around the country trying to, draft on his expertise and on his commentary.
You can watch 2 specials hosted by Chris tonight. And first at 7 p.m.
But they're only
Eastern.
preliminary to
They're the lead-in. JFK, The Day That Changed America, and then at 8 p.m. The Kennedy Brothers, a hardball documentary. Thank you both for your time. As the nation remembers President John F. Kennedy today, we will look back at his legacy and the hope that was when historian John Meacham joins us just ahead. At approximately this time 50 years ago, President Kennedy landed in Dallas and exited Air Force One with First Lady Jackie Kennedy. An hour later, their presidential limousine would drive through downtown Dallas and pass the Texas School Book Depository, where Lee Harvey Oswald was waiting, and the course of history would change. After the break, President Kennedy was an inspiring and iconic leader, and his untimely death left the country at a crossroads. We'll discuss unfinished business and the Kennedy legacy when author and historian Jon Meacham joins us. That's next. No figure looms as large in the American imagination as John F. Kennedy, and yet many have commented on the irony that despite the over 40,000 books written about him, Kennedy remains the elusive president. A life tragically cut short has left historians debating many of the what-ifs of Kennedy's legacy, namely, would he have adopted the same course in Vietnam, and could he have achieved the same landmark civil rights victories and social programs as his successor? Bloomberg's Al Hunt notes that on civil rights, the burning issue of the day, on that, Kennedy was late. Historic advances for minorities were achieved by his successor. Yet, it was Kennedy who put civil rights on the agenda, who sent troops to the South to enforce integration and made it a moral issue at no small political cost. The fact that JFK couldn't enact the actual legislation owes to a dynamic more characteristic of these times. Says Kennedy historian Robert Dallek, his legislative agenda was held hostage to a conservative Congress dominated by Southern lawmakers who saw his reforms as a threat to racial segregation. Joining us now is historian Jon Meacham, author of Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. John, it's always great to have you on the program and talk about history, but especially presidential history. What do you make of Robert Dallek's assessment, basically, that Kennedy was a civil rights champion and is sort of an unsung one at that, insofar as he really laid the foundation in a way that he, was fundamental in terms of passing the actual legislation?
It was. I mean, it was, in fact, you can go back to the 1960 campaign when Harris Wofford and some of the liberals around Kennedy convinced candidate Kennedy to call Coretta Scott King after Dr. King had been imprisoned in the South, which was a remarkable moment in shifting allegiances for many African Americans who were fairly reliable Republican voters to the Democratic Party. It began a shift that continued after the tragedy of Dallas and into the 1960s. I think one of the tragedies of Dallas, if not the central one, besides the human crisis that it provoked, obviously, is that John Kennedy was learning how to be a great president. He came in not particularly prepared for the office. He was a young man, 43 years old. In April of 1961, he authorizes the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, which was a total disaster. He said himself that in a parliamentary system, I would have had to have resigned. He called Dwight Eisenhower to come to Camp David, and Eisenhower asked him a critical question that every president since would be well advised to ask, which is, did you have a meeting with everyone involved? Did you ask all the questions? And Kennedy admitted that he hadn't. And so in October of 1962, when we came as close as we've ever come to nuclear Armageddon, what did he do? He convened a 13-day running meeting, XCOM, where he deliberated the issues and came out on the other side of what Arthur Schlesinger once called the most dangerous hour in human history. He was learning how to do this, and the tragedy of today is what we lost in the sense of a very bright man who understood history and wanted to make a difference.
You know, Ryan, we talk about the Kennedy era as this sort of halcyon, rosy time when change was, when we had a functioning Congress and we had this great leader who rhetorically could persuade even the most intransigent of enemies. And yet, as John points out, he was in many ways learning the ropes as he was on stage. His life was tragically cut short, but, he was an unsung hero on certain things and probably overestimated on others. And I think we talked about the dysfunction in Congress that Kennedy faced. And I feel like it's